Hi everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about authentication, authorization, and governance. We're really seeing a convergence around these areas when it comes to digital identity and identity security that really help organizations move to a much more modern security experience when it comes to governance of access controls. So let's go ahead and take a look at these three working together in a use case to show how organizations can really move to maturity. The first thing is really around authentication, really looking to verify the digital identity, the user, system, code, API, or workload that's making the requests. So really providing those authentication controls that verify, is this really a user who should be allowed onto the system? The next thing is really around authorization, which is really about what can the user do once they've been authenticated? What types of actions, controls, or systems, or applications, or even cloud environments can they access? And then we look at governance, which is really about the auditability, about everything that user has been doing so far to date, and making sure that they're aligned, and also applying things like the principle of least privilege and separation of duties so that they actually don't have too many privileges or become overprivileged. So let's take a look at how all of these things work together. The first thing is we have some type of secure digital identity. There might be something that's provisioned from an identity provider to make sure that you've got some way of authenticating the user's identity. And this might then make a request into a privileged access management solution to really verify, okay, let's authenticate the user, the system of code, and make sure that they actually are a person that should be allowed access to these systems. And then what types of entitlements, what types of things are they allowed to access that is already kind of enabled or provisioned? And it might be something that also could be just on time or on demand as well. So in order to make sure that this really is a identity, and they might apply something like a username and password, we can also apply things like multi-factor authentication to really build that trust level to make sure that it's really not a potentially attacker who's been able to compromise a credential. Once we check and verify the user, then we get into the authorization. What types of entitlements is that user allowed to have access to? They might be able to access a SQL database or an SAP system or ERP system. Those have been already entitled to this user. Then the user might need to have access to something temporarily or to elevate privileges to a target system, such as a very sensitive database. And therefore, they need to provide much more higher levels of security controls to access that target system. And this is where we might apply additional authorization security controls. Things like biometrics. We might look at peer review to ask a colleague or a peer, are they allowed to have access to that system? We might record the session activity, put the actually credentials and passwords into the background so they're not visible to the user. Apply analytics to understand about, has this user been accessing this system before? Looking at things like the auditability that might come from a governance system. And applying risk scores to make sure that what types of controls have been satisfied and are actually exceeding or below the actually risk score that is allowed to access that target system. Really getting into where it's all about dynamic and adaptive-based cybersecurity controls. And this really gets into where it becomes much more intelligent authorization. So really allowing much more better automation and intelligence to make sure the security controls are being satisfied. Once they've been satisfied, that user or system or code will be able to access that target database. And this can also apply to your cloud environments as well. So across multi-hybrid IaaS, PaaS, SaaS environments, and really make sure that you've got consistent security controls across your environment when it comes to identity, things like authentication, authorization, and governance. And if an attacker does come along and they do compromise a credential or an identity and gain access to that initial vector, whether it being through a password reuse or simply just a weak credential that was used by or created by a user, what we're able to do here is prevent that lateral move because they're unable to satisfy those additional security controls when it comes from the authorization side, preventing the attacker from laterally moving into more sensitive systems. And then also applying things like identity threat detection and response, identifying those indicators of compromise to make sure the attacker is unable to reach other systems in the environment. And then also using things like KEEM, they can apply those configurations and look for suspicious or look for misconfigurations across the cloud environment and really make sure that you have the strongest security controls possible to really make it as difficult as possible for attackers to be successful. And then really having that auditability, the governance side, about what has this user been doing, what have they accessed, when, and be able to provide full auditability when it comes to governance or regulations and compliance requirements, whether it being NIST or ISO 27001, or when it comes to PCI compliance, etc. So really making it a very, very modern, seamless experience when it comes to users who need to access different systems across your environment. I hope this provides a good explanation around authentication, authorization, and governance for the modern enterprise, really leading you to your way to intelligent authorization.